Hi folks, my name's Bob Piorun. I did a preliminary video about learning chords on the guitar, but actually this lesson will start at the very basics, choosing a guitar, how to tune a guitar, and so on. I'd like to address a lot of issues that I've encountered in over 50 years of teaching. I've taught thousands of people. Some people might disagree with some of my views, but they're based on observation and trial and error and proof after many years of trying some of these things. First of all, let's start with what kind of guitar you want to start with. Well, if you have likings in certain areas, if you're into heavy metal, probably going to want an electric guitar. If you're into folk music or pop music, you're probably going to want an acoustic guitar. The best thing to do is find a decent guitar of any kind with decent action. Now what that means is the biggest thing about a guitar playability is how hard the strings are to push down. It's called the action of the guitar. Sometimes you might have a good guitar around that the action is hard because the neck has been warped, and that can be fixed very often by some minor adjustments at a music store or anybody who knows how to adjust the neck of a guitar. So you want to find a guitar that the strings aren't too hard to push down. Now, when you first begin with the guitar, you have to decide on some beginning point, even if you haven't decided on exactly the kind of guitar or the type of music you like. For example, let's talk about some of the basic guitars. An acoustic guitar, meaning one that's not usually plugged to an amp, and then one like I have here, which is acoustic electric, which means it is acoustic, and then you can plug it into an amp. Then we have, of course, different types of electric guitars. We have the solid body guitar, semi-solid body guitar, a very hollow body guitar, often favored by jazz people. Generally speaking, the thicker the guitar, the more mellowness it would have. The rockers are going to tend to use a solid body guitar, jazz people, hollow body guitar. Although you find a lot of exceptions. There's a great Canadian jazz player, Ed Bickert, who plays a Telecaster. That's usually favored by country and rock people, solid body guitar. Then Ted Nugent often played a jazz type of guitar. That's a little unusual. So you actually can play any kind of music on any instrument, although certain musics tend to favor one kind of guitar over another. Then we have the nylon string guitar, often used for classical music. And I'd like to say a word about that. People are very concerned sometimes when they begin because they feel the steel strings hurt their fingers. Yes, they will make little depressions in your fingers. They're not going to hurt you. I've never been cut. I've spent thousands of hours on the guitar. I've never cut myself on the strings of a guitar. Probably the most dangerous thing is the little spike at the end of the guitar, which you could poke yourself with. But a string is never going to hurt you. I mean, a string could break. You could run your finger across it. You're really not going to hurt yourself. Yes, it is a little sore when you first begin to push down. It's a piece of wire, and you're going to make little indentations in your fingers. But you'll get over it. It's not that big a thing. Some people might be drawn to a nylon string guitar just because they think it's going to be easier to play and they won't experience that. But it may not be the thing they really want for the type of music they're doing. Generally, a nylon string guitar is used for classical music. The string spacing is wider, the distance between the strings, permitting the fingers to get in the strings for finger-style playing. But the big problem with the nylon string guitar, the classical guitar, is the neck is wider. And that's going to be hard for a child or a woman to get around, even a male. So I would suggest you find any decent guitar. And as a matter of fact, years ago the thinking was you had to begin on an acoustic guitar. I often suggest people begin on a electric guitar, especially children or women. Generally, it's easier to play. Even with a solid body electric, you don't have to have an amp. You will be able to hear the guitar enough to play it or practice it without an amp. So you can find yourself a decent electric guitar to start with. It probably will appear easier to you. The reason is the strings are generally thinner and they feel easier to push down. So the main thing is look for a guitar with good action. That means where the strings aren't too hard to push down. And again, if you find one that the action is hard, it might be able to be fixed. There's a truss rod running through the guitar. It can often be adjusted to make the strings come closer to the guitar. Now, I would like to talk about the left-right hand controversy. I'll be honest with you, in all the years I've been teaching, if I catch a person before they've chosen to hold a guitar this way or this way, I would suggest that they play in the traditional manner with the neck going off to the left. Now, the reason for that, people often think because they're left-handed, everything they're going to do is going to be the opposite of what other people do. And that's not necessarily true on the guitar. And I'll say that because you have to do intricate motions eventually with both hands. This hand's often going to have to move quickly. This hand's often going to have to move quickly. So there's advantages and disadvantages either way. But if you have not got in your mind that you have to play the other way, there's nothing wrong with starting with the guitar in the traditional manner with the neck going off to the left. And I've proven that with a lot of people. And as a matter of fact, one of the best guitar players before my generation in my hometown was left-handed, and he played right-handed. So it all comes out in the wash. If anything, later on when you go to buy a guitar, it's a little harder and sometimes more expensive to get a left-handed guitar. Sometimes they can be restrung. But if I had a person who had never really picked one up and have a preconceived notion in their mind of left and right, I would start them in the usual way and teach them traditionally the same way. And I've proven that a number of times, and it works out very well. That brings up the idea of, as you're going along, people come up with all these things why they're not progressing. My fingers are too short. My fingers are too fat. My guitar is too big, whatever. The big problem is they probably haven't practiced enough. And I'll tell you right now, and I say this over and over again, the secret to playing an instrument and many things in life is perseverance. You just have to do it over and over again. To get the simplest of chords, all of us, Eric Clapton, Wes Montgomery, B.B. King, everyone, had to struggle and do it over and over. We did not wake up one morning and put our hands on the guitar and play. Yes, some people may acquire the dexterity quicker, but most of it comes from perseverance. Just keep working at it over and over, and you will get it. Okay, so again, you got to overcome some of these misconceptions about your fingers not being right or whatever. It's usually just going to be practice. Now let's talk a bit about tuning. When you first begin the guitar, you're probably not going to have a guitar that's in tune unless somebody's done it for you. I would suggest the best method is to find a friend who plays and have them tune it, or bring it to a local music store. It only takes a minute to tune a guitar by someone who knows it. And I would suggest going to a music store, because if it's a reputable music store, they're going to take a few minutes for you to tune a guitar. It's going to be no big deal. Now, there's a number of ways to tune the guitar, but here's the problem. Most people have to gain the experience of what being in tune is. And that's something you can't just do right from the beginning. Some people have a better ear than others. You can buy little tuners. They go on the end of the guitar. I have one right here. It actually shows you when you're in tune. But what I would do is first have someone tune it for you, and practice regardless whether you think the guitar is in tune or not, because at first you're dealing with just muscular motion and you're trying to memorize where to put your fingers. If it doesn't sound great as far as tuning, it may not be pleasing to you, but at least you're acquiring the skills you need, and then you'll get better at tuning as you go on. Probably the most traditional way of tuning guitar would be this. We take our sixth string. Remember, the strings are counted from the bottom up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Start the sixth string and hold, without bending, hold the 5th fret of the 6th string. Now you're going to produce a note there that the next string should match. The next string open should match. If that next string does not match that 5th fret, what you should do is tune that 5th string until it matches that note. Then we hold the 5th fret of the next string, which supposedly is now in tune, and we tune the 4th string open to that. Then we hold the 4th string and tune the 3rd string open to that. Now, when we get down to the 3rd string, what we have to do is go in 1 fret to the 4th fret to tune our 2nd string. And then we go back out to the 5th fret to tune the 1st string. Now, you might have to do that a few times. What we're doing is we're taking the 6th string and we're matching the next string to this 5th fret, which should produce the same note. And then in turn, we're matching each string till it matches the 5th fret of the previous one, with the exception of this 4th fret. Some people will ask, why is this one string tuned differently? That's just a traditional way the guitar has been tuned over the years, and we can go into that, why that evolved, but for now, just take it for what it is. So what we're doing is, and you may ask, what if the 6th string were out of tune? Well, in the beginning, that may not make a big difference, because what we're trying to do is make your guitar relatively in tune to itself. We're not worried about whether it matches other guitar players. We're just trying to tune to yourself. So if this string is anywhere near being where it should be, you may or may not know that, but just after a while, you'll know the feeling of how tight that string should be. Well, what we're trying to do is just match each string one to another till they all are in tune. A good thing to do after you're in tune, supposedly, is learn the chord E. Guitar players like to use that chord as an indication you should hear a pleasing sound. E is a good chord to learn first to check your tuning. When you play it, it should sound pleasing to you. If you have a note or two out of tune, you can go back and recheck that, matching one string to another. I would learn to tune the guitar like that first before I purchased a tuner, because you want to build your ear, and that would be a good way to do it. Back in my days, there were no tuners, so we had to learn to tune the guitar by matching one string to another. And these little tuners are less than $20, and they're a good thing to have. As a matter of fact, every professional probably will have one, just to tune right up to pitch. Another method is to, if you have a piano in the house, you could match each string to that particular note. I'll put up a little chart showing where the notes are on the piano. You could tune your guitar to a piano. Then finally, if you finally do eventually get one of these tuners, you got to remember that you have to know the names of the strings, E, A, D, G, B, E, so that when they indicate on there, you know which note you're tuning to. Some tuners will just show the note you're hitting. For example, this note should be E. If it were out of tune and it showed G, that tuner is only going to show you whether the G is in tune or not. So you have to be very careful with the tuners. They do take some work to learn how to use them. So again, I would learn the traditional thing of tuning one string to another till it sounds right. But again, in the beginning, just to get started, have a friend tune it for you. Go to a music store. You can get in line and have someone strike each string and you try to tune it, but you have to be able to hear that it's in tune or out of tune. Most people can at the beginning. All right, let's talk a little bit about the idea of teacher or not. Well, I've been teaching for 50 years, and of course when I started there was no internet, and I'll be the first one to admit there is everything you need to know on the guitar is on the internet. Everything you need to know about anything can be found on the internet. But here's the problem with it. It's not in a uniform manner. It's just a lot of knowledge. If you're starting from the beginning, you could find 50 people talking about the way to start. The best bet is to go to a good professional teacher who's going to guide you through the proper things. Otherwise, on the internet, you could waste a lot of time on what some some 12-year-old kid thinks is important for you to learn, when really it's not. Your best bet is find a professional teacher, at least to get started, and then once you get started in the right direction, you can find most of what you want on the internet, songs and so on. But from the beginning, it'd be good to get a teacher. Let's address the fact of reading or not reading. When I first started teaching, because I learned to read and was told reading was important, I would often teach my students to read. Then I realized I was losing a lot of my students to other teachers because they were just teaching them licks to their favorite songs and so on. So I had to say that I thought idealistically I was right that they should learn to read, but most people want to play songs that they know from the beginning. So what I've adopted over time was kind of a happy medium. If it were a child, I would teach them to play simple songs that they like, but I would also teach them to read. If they are adults and they don't want to read, I find it's not worthwhile pressing them into it if they're not going to do it, because they're going to grow sick of it and not keep up with the guitar. I would suggest learning to read. As a matter of fact, that accounts for most of my ability to make my living as a musician. I got to play with some symphony orchestras and some great people that you could never play with if you can't read. Some Broadway shows and so on that I've been able to do. I had the chance to work with James Galway, probably the world's greatest flute player with the Syracuse Symphony, because I was able to read. So in my line of work as a professional, it's definitely worthwhile. If you just want to learn some basic songs, that's fine. You could start and learn your songs, and then if you get serious, I would recommend at least investigating learning to read, but it's not necessary. You can learn right from the beginning, learn your basic chords, get some technique, and then you can start playing some songs. So as far as reading, what might be good is to get a basic book, and as you're learning to read songs you like, you might try learning to read little by little at the same time, so that you're enjoying the guitar and still progressing as a musician. Most other instruments are taught. You learn to read right from the beginning. The guitar has always been the type of instrument where people showed each other songs. I can remember when I began, what we did, we just watched each other play and learned from each other, and then later on we got into reading. But again, I would suggest that you did learn to read eventually if you want to go into the future with it, although, again, it's not necessary. Okay, I hope some of these things will be useful to you, and then you might go on to my lesson about learning basic chords. In the beginning, what I would do is learn basic chords and changing from one to another. Whether you use a pick or not. As a matter of fact, let me address that a bit. When I first have people start, I found it's better to have them learn with a pick and then eventually teach them to play fingerstyle. If a person learns with their thumb to strike the guitar or their fingers, generally it feels very awkward to go to the pick. This is only my recommendation for many years of teaching. Most traditional rock and pop and country music is played with a pick, and a lot of traditional folk and pop music is played with the fingers. So I generally teach my students first play with a pick, get some basic knowledge with that, and then later on get into some finger picking. If you want to learn a lot of the classic tunes that were they were done fingerstyle, of course. There were a lot of classic rock tunes and so on. And so on. So those would be fun to learn later on, but at first get a pick and get a little dexterity, then you can get into some of those things. So as far as beginning, get yourself a decent guitar, have someone tune it for you, make sure the action is not too bad. Even consider an electric guitar over an acoustic. If you're left-handed, I always suggest playing in the traditional manner anyways. Even if you don't think your guitar is in tune, practice some of these things anyways. Find a chart of basic chords, which you can find almost any place, and just try to learn to change from one chord to another. That's the biggest thing to do at the beginning that'll get you started. Then you can little by little add in some lead things and so on. As far as the strumming, I would again consider a pick, although you could do it with your thumb or your fingers, but I would start with a pick and then later on acquire some finger picking skills. I have 2 books, one which is learning to read, and it is, I've learned a lot by looking at some of the other reading books, which I tried to correct a lot of the errors I found in them and make my book a little better. Then I have a general book that is just for learning all your basic chords and bar chords and scales. It has nothing to do with reading. It does talk about learning tablature, which is another subject. Tablature is just a picture of where to put your fingers on the guitar. It's not reading music. I can go into that in the future. So if you're interested in any of my books, I'll put my website up there and you can contact me or my email. So again, the biggest thing I would suggest about learning the guitar, and this goes for many things as I started with today, perseverance. You have to stay with it. The thing that separates a person who ends up playing an instrument is somebody who just sticks with it. Sometimes it's very frustrating. I remember reading stories about Jimi Hendrix saying he hated his guitar. He often would go to sleep with it, but he hated it so much he wanted to throw it out the window at times. And we've all felt like that. It's very frustrating, and the thing about it, it's endless. No matter how good you become at something on guitar, somebody else is doing it better. Some of the greatest guitar players in the world had disabilities. Django Reinhardt, considered one of the greatest jazz players of all, had the use of only 2 fingers. The others were burnt in a fire and they were almost unusable. Tony Iommi, Black Sabbath, had his fingertips cut off. He had some kind of metal tips put on them. Jose Feliciano was blind. Jeff Healey, great blues player, was blind. I've seen people on pictures from, I believe from South America, one guy playing had no arms or hands. He learned to play with his feet. If you really have the determination, you can do it. You just have to keep with it. Try to do it every day, as frustrating as it may seem, and you'll end up playing. Okay, thanks. I hope you learned a thing from this. I would go on to my lesson about chords, chord strumming, and so on. Thank you. Bob Piorun.